All right, welcome back up. Picking the game back up with the Italians here in Versailles 1919. The stage is set for an interesting opening move because the Italians are having to make the opening decision. And they look at a board that they don't really like. That's the one thing I've learned about playing this game is that if you ever have the ability to put cubes out on other issues, even if they don't mean anything to you, put them out because it's so nice to be able to trade off favors. Like, I'll resolve this issue for you if you resolve this issue for me. Because, like, right now, the Italians are trying to broker a deal with the British over Smyrna, but the problem is that they don't have much leverage. You know, they can say, we'll resolve this for you, but the British can't really do anything for them because there's really nothing to give them. So instead, they're going to do something a little more mischievous that I like better. And I learned something from someone who commented, and I want to give them credit for this. Yeah, and it's Cameron Pearson. It could be Pearson. I apologize. But Cameron pointed out something very important that I misunderstood a little bit. Not that I think I got wrong, but just that I didn't. It makes so much more sense. So I will explain to you what Cameron told me once I play everything out. So the Italians are looking at the board, and they really want this issue just because it makes them happy, and they don't. They get the 5 points. It's just an issue that they have interest in, have a stake in, which isn't all the cards. Italy doesn't have, all the cards in the world. Lots of times it's the other power. So they could drop some cubes on there, but they see that as a losing battle eventually. So they're going to go ahead and resolve it, which makes it a lot of fun because they'll resolve it for the British. So all of the British cubes will go over there. The British are going to resolve it. They want to resolve it as this one, right? Because they get their ship, their naval point, and the 5 points. That's what they really want to do. But if they do that, they lose a happiness, which puts them down to 10, which means that they lose a military, which I have to look it up. Do they lose 2? They have 4 total. So here they have more than that already. So they go here, they have to lose 2. I'm not sure. Anyways, they're going to lose the military one way or another, 1 or 2 if they go down there. So they really don't want to do that. So instead, they're not going to want to do this because they want the Italians to sign the treaty. So they're going to resolve it as the top. So the Italians get what they want anyway, kind of. They don't get the card, but they do get the happiness. So that's something. Better than nothing. So we'll give this card to the British, 5 points. And then we also have to move the Balkans up by 1 unrest. And the Middle East up by 2, which makes it the highest. We'll get back to that in a second. To finish all that out, we have to go to this card here. Now, whoever got this card down here, I guess it was the French, I don't remember. They really should have put an influence cube on this to give them another option here because it says reduce Middle East unrest by 3. That could put it back down to the area where it's not going to cause an uprising. No one put a cube on it, so that means the person that resolves it gets to decide. The Italians are going to decide not to resolve that. More on that in a second. Now, looking at these here, nothing really that interesting that they see. Pulling down this one is kind of fun, though, because they can watch everybody else fight about it. And now they can pick one of these, optional, and settle a league issue, or play with the lowest happiness, exhaust 6 influence. So they're going to bring this one down because they're not going to be in last. So somebody's going to have to go through that. And now they get to pick a new issue, which these are kind of boring. The military intervention doesn't sound bad, but okay. They're going to get Dobruja, maybe. Nothing too interesting there. It's a four-pointer, so they don't love it. Mesopotamia, 5-pointer, and nothing really too much of interest there. The problem with these, they're better, but because they're more points, but the other sides have a lot more interest in them, so I think they're actually going to go with this one. They could go for the big pointers, and somebody's going to pull that out. I can almost guarantee it. But the Italians are going to try and keep a low profile. And so now, the big moment of truth here, and see if it happens or not. It does not. So it is relief efforts, TE Lawrence Arabia. Remove one powder keg from a random region. So that's interesting. So that'll go in there. We're going to roll in a random region. And it is a 1, which is Europe. That was already gone, so nothing happens. Now, it's not exactly what the Italians wanted it to happen, but it's still probably going to happen at some point, so it's not a big deal. But they said, let's dump the Middle East issue off to them because we can get what we want anyways, kind of. We can get it resolved on the side we want, not the one we don't want, so that's good. Kind of forced the British into doing that. But also that knocks the unrest up to the maximum that it can go. And if there is an unrest, which they're hoping that there would have been, they would have the ability to modify it, and the French could modify it. And then the British would have the most Middle East issues. They have 2, more than anyone else. So then they would have to give up their highest ranking issue, which was Smyrna. So they were hoping that there would have been an unrest right there, an uprising. We would have pulled this right back out, and then everyone would have bid on it. And the Italians have 2 military in the region. So they would have been in pole position to fight that one out. Now, of course, that can still happen in the future. It's very likely. But the part that I was going to mention about Cameron is that I said earlier that if there was a tie, for instance, like let's take a look. The French, the Americans, and the British, before this card came out, all had one military issue. I said that it was decided by whoever had the leftmost military on that track, which is true. But what I thought was that that meant that whoever had the leftmost military on that track among the people there. So, basically, if let's say it was those 3, the British, the French, and the Americans, and only the Italians had a military there, then I was under the understanding that it was random because none of them had a military. But that's not true. It's whoever has the leftmost. So the Italians could have had no issues in the Middle East. There had been a tie, and they decide who the issue comes from, which is just brilliant. Before, I was a little confused by what the purpose of it was, and almost always in a game, if you're confused by something or something is kind of off, you probably misunderstand it. That or it's a bad board game. Usually, those are the 2 options. So I thought this was a little weird, but then when Cameron explained what it meant, I totally get it, and that's actually really good. So if there would have been a tie, the British still would have decided, but since they have the most, now it doesn't matter. So the Italians can also do a military bit if they want, which they're not going to at this point, so that'll pass it over to the British. All right, so the British now, more fun stuff. More fun stuff is on the way. So before anything happens, we're going to do something we haven't done yet, which is demobilize. You'll notice the British are on 11 happiness, which means 1 more and they fall down to that area they don't want to go. So they're going to demobilize one of their military. They put it in the highest available space, which is the 5, and they gain 5 happiness for that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's that easy. So a big jump for them. That's nice. And obviously it's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 2, 2, 1. So the later on you wait, the less happiness that you get out of it. So they're going to do that first before anything else. And they can do 1 military action before or after anything else. So they're going to do that first. Then they're going to resolve Syria. They like Syria. They would like to win Syria, but they can't with pieces that are on it. So people that are here, half, it's going to be 1 because it's rounded down. The other 2 go back to the U.S. general. all the French. And then this gets awarded to the French. And they can decide what they're going to do. I think it's pretty obvious. They're going to go with Empire. That's another point for them. Middle East cannot go up anymore. And that'll lower the happiness of the Americans. Americans go down by 1. French Empire down on their sheet. Cool. Now, what they're hoping for is basically what we saw last time, because if there's an uprising check, the British have 2, the French have 2, and the British have the leftmost. So they'll decide, and obviously they'll pick the French. Now, they could pick Constantinople if they wanted, because it's a 6 as well. But they'll probably take Syria, because they can also confiscate another point from the French when they do this. It's like a 2-point swing. But anyways, they have to get the uprising check first. So that's what they're going to look for. So we'll do this. Player with the lowest happiness loses 6 influence. So they avoid having to do this, has to exhaust 6 influence. So the Americans are the lowest. They'll have to take 4, 5, 6, leaving them with a measly 2, which is pretty bad. Now the British can move down a different one, and because there might be a battle for that Middle East event, they're going to pick one they're not really interested in. So they don't want to pick one that's like good, because they might not have anything to fight for it with. So they're going to pick something else. And then they can bring down one of these. Add or remove. They're going to go with this one. They could unsettle a league issue, which is kind of interesting, because the French have one of those. They have labor reform. So I think they're going to do that one instead. And they're going to put a cube on it. So if it has that influence cube right there, that means you can put a cube on it, and then you decide how this optional event happens, regardless of who actually settles the issue. So now he can pick a replacement. This one looks pretty good. They're going to drop it in there, and then they're going to draw this card. The big part of all of this. The Italians and the British sit with bated breath, the French holding theirs. And it says, player controlling the most issues moves 10 influence to exhausted. So not what they wanted. But it does have to do with the Middle East. It's the Sykes-Picot partition of the Middle East. So that's, But whoever has the most issues has to, one of the most issues has to lose 2 influence. So they have 4, 2, 3, 3. So that'll be from the French. They have to exhaust 2, which isn't a whole lot, really. It's just 2 less than they had. So once again, don't get the uprising check, which is unfortunate. But the French are very happy about that as it stands. So now the Americans are going to be next, and they have basically no cubes. So they'll probably just reclaim some stuff. Okay, so the Americans got some stuff back from the influence, and then they demobilized, which put them up from, I think here, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, from there to there, just to get themselves off that brink, because it's kind of dangerous. The French are going to, they can't resolve anything, because there's nothing to resolve. They could get their 6 influence back, but they want to take this time to get ahead of the curve. They're going to drop 4 on the Baltic states and 3 on Mesopotamia. You know what? Make that 4. 4 on Mesopotamia. And then lastly, they're going to be a little bit risky and take the military and deploy it, not demobilize, because demobilize would be the smart thing to do, and deploy it to Europe here on this third one. So they're going to lose 2 happiness because of that. Down to the brink, and they're going to get back to 3 influence cubes that will go back to their pile. And that's because everybody has a European issue except for the French. So if the French get one, then they'll be tied with everyone. They can break the tie. Either way, they'll break the tie. If like there was an unrest to happen before this, then they would still break the tie. But that's important for them to be able to do that because they don't want to lose the Baltic states if they get it, but also Rhineland would be good for the 6 points. Or if they don't want to mess with that because it already has the industry on it, they can always go for Tyrol, which is also tasty. So Italians now. So the Italians split between Kurdistan and Roja, 4 and 3, just to kind of set themselves down for the ability to negotiate in those areas, because they could always, resolve something on someone else's behalf, kind of. So, with that, the British decided to drop 5 big ones on Mesopotamia and Kurdistan to kind of take the lead on those 2 big issues that they really want to fall for them. The Americans, even more interestingly, decided, rather than to resolve something, to add to their amount in the Baltic states, which was kind of interesting because they really want to do this one independent Baltics, obviously, because it gives them 2 self-determination markers. But what they did is that they put down, I forget how many they had to start with, 3, I guess. They put down 4, and 1 over here in Transylvania, which is all of their cubes. Reason being because the French only have 4 cubes. So if the French want to take control of the Baltic states, they'll have to add all 4. But then they can't add to another place to take over because you have to have exactly, you have to place on exactly 2 issues. So that prevented the French from taking that one back. So that was kind of smart. So now the French have 2 options. They could either pick up some exhausted military influence to gear up for next turn. Probably not going to be a next turn for them as far as getting the Baltic states. So instead, they're going to drop 2 here on Mesopotamia and 2 here on Transylvania. They're out of cubes, by the way. So they're really hoping that they get some of these back. So now the Italians, and once again, they've got stuff at the top of the board. Maybe they can work out a deal where they manage something. And one extra thing, the French are also going to demobilize, which will get them 3 happiness. Because they were sitting down there on the brink, which was not too enjoyable. Okay, so the Italians did something kind of clever, might be clever. They noticed that everybody else did not have any influence. So none, 1, none. They had more than this. So they decided to go ahead and put 3 on Transylvania, 2 on Kurdistan to take the lead in both of those, and then let the negotiating commence, because there becomes a point when everybody has all of their cubes on the board that you can't do anything else besides negotiate, really. So the British are in a very bad spot, really, because they are behind in both the places that they want. They don't really have much here that they can work with, and that's pretty much where all of their cubes are tied up, is there and there. So with a lack of much else to do, they're going to turn a kind of unfortunate situation into an interesting situation with a combo of maneuvers here. So first of all, and it's all going to involve screwing the French. So first of all, they are going to offer to resolve the Baltic states for the Americans, and the Americans can resolve it however they like. If they want to do the independent Baltics, they can. They would like them to do independent Lithuania, but if they don't want to, that's understandable. You're going for your own benefit thing. We get it. In exchange, they're going to bring down Kurdistan. They want the Americans to resolve Kurdistan, and they want the Italians to resolve it as a UK mandate. Now, everything besides the first one which is which they don't have any strings on. They can do whatever they want. Everything else is non-binding, so they can bring down Kurdistan. The Americans don't have to resolve it, and even if they did, then the Italians would not have to do it as a UK mandate. Now, the Americans don't have a problem with doing it, resolving Kurdistan, and the Italians don't have a problem with doing the UK mandate. But the Americans are probably going to do independent Baltics and get those 2 points because they're giving away points, so they're probably going to do this one. They wouldn't accept it otherwise. And the kicker to all of that will be that they're hoping that it works out in a certain sequence of events, because the British are going to try and manipulate it a little bit to where it works out a certain way, because the whole thing will be here is that if the Middle East has an uprising, then the British will get to decide. If Kurdistan goes to the Italians, they'll get to decide between who loses one of their events. They'll decide to pick the French, so that's secured. The other half of it is Europe, which Europe will go up by 2 unrest, and the French would get to decide who gets to do that. But the British are not going to play along. They're going to take a big action here and deploy a military to the 4 track. So they've got 3 of their 4 there. That's going to make their happiness go down by 4, which is dangerous. But they want to do that so when the European stuff comes up, that they can decide, because it'll be if the Americans win that, then I guess it would be the Americans who get to pick. So it wouldn't be a big deal. So I guess they don't have to do that. It's nice because then they have some sway over it, but I don't think it's quite worth right now that 4. So actually, I'm going to wait. I forgot the Americans were going to win this and not the French. So, anyways, they're going to resolve this with all of that in place. So all of these will go to the box over here. So literally all of the U.S. cubes, besides 1, are in the exhausted. Half the French go back, 2 and 2. This will go to the Americans, and they're going to resolve it as an independent Baltics. They're going to reduce the French happiness by 1, put European unrest up by 2, and then award this to themselves with the 2 self-determination markers and an anti-communism marker, even though no one's going for that. Would be interesting if they were, though. So 2 and 1. Okay. So to finish this all out, they're going to resolve this, which the British have the option over, which is the second part of this plan to screw the French. They can unsettle a league issue of their choice, which they will do because everybody is pretty low right now. Well, actually, if they do that, somebody else could take it from the French, which the Italians could. So taking this league issue from the French is kind of nice. If nothing else, just to take it away from them. So they're going to do their card that they had the option on to unsettle a league issue to bring back up labor reform. So we'll do this before we do anything else, and the player who controlled it first will bid first, and the French are going to go everything they have, which is 1 military, and see, the tough part is if we get an uprising, then we could be going for the Rhineland, which they really want to keep. But that's once again an if. That if it's not, then this was all wasted. So if they pass, they can't get back in. So they'll hop in just to see, because this is here now and they can keep it. They're not going to lose anything if they do this. So the Italians are being prodded on by the British, who say for them to go for it. So they'll put 2 down. The British cannot top that, so they will pass. And the Americans can also not top that, so they will pass. And the French are out as well. So the Italians will take these 2, cut into the exhausted. The French keep theirs, so they're not incredibly disappointed. And then the Italians have to decide between these 2. They don't really want to give everybody happiness, because why? And so they're going to go with this one. And we will continue where we left off with number 3 here. British get to pick what comes down next, either add or remove 1 unrest, or influence to add a powder keg to the Middle East. So they're going to bring this one down and put their cube on it. Because they want that option. They don't want anyone else having that option. Then they can decide between here and here. These 3, they're going to bring this one down because they're going to hold on to their part of the deal. Or keep up their part of the deal. Which they had to. In order for it all to work. So they're going to bring this one down. Then shifting through here. The only one that is interesting is the League military intervention. So they will put it out, and then here we go, the big moment of truth. Add 2 unrest to a random region, so not an uprising check, unrest check. Uprising. So random region is 5. They're going to add 2 unrest to the Pacific. There's not been a Pacific issue yet, which when they do, it'll be very important because the Japanese signing the treaty is always, they're pretty much always involved when it comes to the Pacific stuff. So the British are done. They're not going to deploy. And then to the Americans, who, having heard the rest of the deal, will have to consider they got their event, the Baltic states, so they've been asked to return the favor and give Kurdistan to the Italians. I can't really see why not, especially given they got their event. They're here to, get everybody, make everybody happy. At least for the moment, they're going to take that loss, but this will. They're okay with it. So all 6 of these go into the box. Plus, they're pretty. I think they may be like the first person. They may be in first, so they're okay with keeping some people happy for the moment in hopes of a return favor. So the Italians, they're going to resolve it as was specified. They don't care between these because they get points for the globes. So they're going to do it as this one. Once again, screwing the French. So they're going to move the American happiness down by 1. Middle East unrest by 2, which can't move. And then they're going to grab a British Empire marker. And drop it on there. Now I kind of think that the flags only count. No, it's part of their thing, so never mind. I was afraid there for a second I had messed it up. So the Americans do that, then we're going to go over here. The British can move up, spend 1 influence to add a powder keg. They have 4. So, if there's an uprising, it'll already happen. So I think they're gonna not do that because they want to keep their influence. So 3 up here. The Americans are not in love with any of these, honestly. So I think they're going to bring down this one. Make it an interesting choice for the French. And then one of these, exhaust 2 influence to remove a powder keg or either add or remove from the Middle East. And they're going to pick that. They can't put a cube on it. And then after we get an issue, they're going to go with drawing 2. We have Slovenia and Croatia, which really is interesting. The Americans actually quite like to do this. And then widow pensions, which is a reparations issue. This one is less interesting. So they're going to do Slovenia and Croatia, which they are quite interested in, because they're talking about Yugoslavia here, which makes things interesting. So an unrest. Do we get an unrest? It is Vittorio Orlando, the Italian Prime Minister, and it says each player recovers 4 exhausted influence. So just something nice for everybody. No, nothing nasty. So everybody's going to get 4. And then it'll be over to the French, who have 2 Italian issues on the table. Not really wanting to help the Italians at all because they just got screwed by pretty much everybody at the table. So they'll have to think a bit about this. They might can broker a deal with Mesopotamia involved. So the French don't have much to play for on the board right here. And they could use some of their cubes, but they're going to try and do something a little bit better. They're going to offer to resolve Transylvania in exchange for the Italians resolving Mesopotamia once the French bring it down. So the Italians don't have a problem with that, except they say, no, you resolve this one, not Transylvania, because if you're going to get the 5 points plus 1 for your flag, we need to get a little bit more out of that deal. The French wanted to do this one so they could get their cubes back, but they're willing to do this anyways, just to get this through. So they're going to toss in these yellow cubes and do the exhausted influence. Give this to the Italians. They're going to do it as Romania. They're going to resolve it as giving it to Romania so that the Middle East goes up, which it cannot go up, so it doesn't move. Unless there's some rule that says when it can't move, then automatically an uprising thing happens, which I don't think it does. But then they're going to resolve this, which says either add or remove 1 unrest in the Middle East. They have to do that. And they are going to reduce by 1 to make it less likely, because they know they're going to get screwed if the British get to choose. Now, already it would have happened in Europe first anyways, unless it says to do an uprising check. But just keeping that down is good. So then they're going to pick this one as part of the deal. And then looking at these optional powder keg, select a player in 2 regions. Either they exhaust 4 influence or add 1 unrest to each. So they're going to put a cube on this just to make sure nobody else does it. And lastly, this one they don't love, and they don't really, I mean, that's nice. Well, actually, that's kind of good. So they're going to pick that one, and still waiting on that uprising, still waiting. Move all deployed military to exhausted. Now that is interesting. That's really going to throw a kink in some stuff here. Because, see, the thing about this was that they win Mesopotamia, they have the Middle East. They'll have 3 issues in the Middle East. But since the British had the leftmost deployed, they knew it was going to be them having to pick one of their issues for an uprising anyways, so they said it didn't really matter, we might as well have it outright. So they said whatever. But with this Vladimir Lenin card, all deployed military goes to exhausted. And all 4 of the Italians are in there, by the way. But that's really made things quite interesting. Especially as far as moving those unrest markers. So now it's going to be a fresh game for the Italians to redeploy. Maybe they decide they want to do it a little bit different. But the part that hurts about all of that is that they have to take those happiness penalties again, which is really not fun. But everyone can readjust their priorities because you can't take pieces from there. So it'll give an interesting opportunity. So with the reshuffle on the region track, the Italians are actually going to break their promise, which they can do because it wasn't the same turn, it's non-binding. They're not going to settle an issue. They're going to get back 6 cubes and all exhausted military. Which they can, by the way, get them back from that action. They can bring some back, so that's not true about what I said earlier. So they're going to get all of them back. Reason being is that's one of their actions. The other action is going to be to deploy one, and they're going to deploy one to here because that one's free. It's not going to cost them a happiness loss, which honestly, do they even really care? Not really, because there's people who are trying to get them their happiness up and down. So they're going to go with that one. They would get 2 back. But they're going to do that because they can influence the roll and because they don't, they want to have that there so they can get possibly the Rhineland back, which would be the issue up for grabs should there be unrest or an uprising in Europe. So they're going to kind of hedge their bets in the future because they're set up here and someone's going to get the French. So, it's okay. They'll get over it. It's my sort of thing. So the British now, with being behind here and, still going to think about deploying to the Regents track. All right, so the British deployed up in the Middle East, picked up a spot up there, just give up 2 happiness to get back on the Middle East track because they want to decide who has to give up in case of a tie. And the French can't go any higher of them when they're in that position, so that was really the best spot for them. They also put some down in the military intervention and some down here in Mesopotamia. Then the Americans go. They just picked up some influence and then deployed to the highest available spot, really highest available spot in Europe up here, which caused them to go down in happiness, but also let them pick up 3 more influence. So they are pretty much locked and loaded. But they want that because they have the most European issues. So if there was a tie, they could decide, or if they needed to defend the Rhineland, they could use their military there. So now we're up to the French, who are rather vengeful that the British took this back over. They're rather aggravated. So they went ahead, everything all in Mesopotamia, widows' pensions, because that's really bad for the British, and deployed a military to the Middle East. They have pleaded with the Italians to resolve Mesopotamia, because if they do that, that really puts the ball in their court. But the Italians are in a pretty good position. They have all of their stuff back, all of their cubes, military. They're set up in Transylvania. They don't see a need to do it. There's nothing the French can offer them. So they're going to ignore those requests and let them continue their infighting, because while they're doing that, the Italians can score some points. French get half. It's 1. And the Americans get half, which they get to keep. So the Italians are going to resolve the top one, move the Baltic unrest up 1, which is getting a little bit worrying because the Italians have 3, the only people with Balkans issues. So they have to be a little bit careful just as far as the leg goes. So they got gossip, which is going to be done by the French, which says select a player in 2 regions. That player either exhausts 4 influence or adds an unrest to each of those 2 places. So for payback for what they did, the French are going to say, okay, Italians, we're going to pick the Balkans, and there's nowhere else they can really hurt them, so they're just going to pick the Middle East. to bump that one up a little bit. And if you don't exhaust 4 influence, then it's going to go up, which would make the Balkans also go along with it. So the Italians don't like being blackmailed, especially with their literal own card, Vittorio Orlando. So they're in a good spot, but they're going to give up the cubes because they don't want that Balkans going up and having. I don't know if anyone's actually interested in fighting for it, but just to keep it safe. And the French will bring down widow, pensions, 2 issues that they had the lead on. And then this one says, beginning with you, each player either takes a demobilize action or reduces happiness by 2. That's pretty interesting. Now, the British don't want to demobilize if they don't have to, and neither do the Italians, because they get points for that. The Americans don't particularly care, and neither do the French. So they're going to take this down here. And they don't care what order it's in, so they're going to leave that. And then pick between these. They're just going to draw. I'm sorry, this is the Italians. So the Italians actually don't want this because they do not want to have to give up. So they're going to bring this down instead. Sorry, I had in my mind that I was the French. So they don't want that one to come up. So now we have Russia negotiations, which does piss off the Japanese. So someone's going to be interested. The French are going to be interested in getting this out. And then Macedonia, might as well. We've already got the Balkans pretty much in our grasps. And so then here's an interesting one. Will it be an uprising? Uprising check. -1 to the die roll. So -1 is is less likely to make the uprising happen. And it'll happen in Europe. Now, the Americans and the Italians can modify. The Americans are going to -1. The Italians are going to add 1. So it's going to be just the -1 really when it all comes down to it. It's going to be a -1. And they need a 4 or higher. So a 4 doesn't do it, but a 5 and a 6 do. To bring up the Rhineland, which is what everyone's really been waiting for. So it's a 2, -1 is a 1. That is not even close to being enough. So we do not have an uprising, which is good for the Americans. And so that does it for the Italians. And now the British, in a tight squeeze because they don't want to lose all of this happiness, because that could really mess with them as far as losing their military. So the British went ahead and maxed out the rest of their cubes, which they always had more than the French. They retook these 2 issues. The Americans come in and the French plead with them, or the British want them to take one of these. There's just no interest for the Italians or the Americans to get involved. They just don't really see any interest. So they went ahead and dropped 5 on these 2 issues. This one because it gets self-determination. This one because it's a league issue. And then they went ahead and demobilized as well, which got up their happiness because they don't care too much about that. So it'll be up to the French, who have to make up their minds about whether or not to resolve a British-controlled issue. Okay, so I recorded a bit, but it recorded over it. It didn't record correctly. So I've got to redo what we just did. So the French left off with the Mesopotamia issue here, having very much invested almost everything into it, along with the British. They had escalated the fight over these 2 issues. So they looked at the overall picture, which was that the French and the British occupy 3rd and 4th place. The French and the British occupy 3rd and 4th place, respectively, behind the Italians and the Americans, who have far more victory points than them, when you factor in the extra points they're going to get at the end. So they decided that they're going to offer the British a truce here, that this is really useless to fight over these issues so heavily when they need to be fighting the Italians and the Americans rather amongst themselves. Otherwise, there's no real chance of them winning. So it was a show of good faith, which had some kickbacks in it. They went ahead and resolved the Mesopotamia issue, which went down here to the British. The French got all 8 of their cubes back because they resolved it and they were not the winners. The British resolved the issue as a UK mandate, which made the US happiness go down by 1, raised the unrest in the Middle East, and gave them an empire marker. So the unrest now sits there, and also the Americans went down 1, and the British had to go down 1 because of something. It was the card, I believe, or something. Yeah, this card that we got drawn out. The French brought down Macedonia because they don't want the Americans to have a free shot at one of these, since the British used up all of their resources on these 2 cards as well. And so they brought down this one and brought in Vladimir Lenin, with eyes towards this card eventually that has an uprising check in the Balkans, which will affect only the Italian player because they have all of the Balkans issues. So the French get their cubes back, which is good, but also now the British have the majority of Middle East events. So if it comes down to an unrest in that region, it'll be the British who have to offer up something, which the British knew, but they're hoping to suppress any unrest and keep that European unrest as high as possible to make sure that they get an opportunity at the Rhineland, which the Americans have been holding, because that would be a big loss for them, big 6 points that they would lose. So with that all said and done, now on to the Italians. All right, so it's over to the Americans. I'll go to the other stuff, but I just want to say the one thing I love about this game is just how dirty you can get as far as just being able to come up with a plan and be like, oh man, that's really nasty. I think that's it just makes you it makes you feel bad, but it makes you feel good, because what the Americans are about to do is very much kind of a stick in the back for everybody. So anyways, let's talk about what happened with everybody else first. The Italians had lots of cubes available, so they went ahead and deployed them, putting 6 on Slovenia, Croatia, wanting to hold on to their fate in the Balkans, as well as 2 on Macedonia because it was open and no one seems to have any real interest in it. Also, no one has any real interest in the Balkans, so that's fine with them. They were happy to fill that void. Then they kicked it over. I don't know. I think they also deployed. That was the other very controversial bit. They deployed a military piece to the Middle East, which lowered their happiness by 1 and put them outside of the treaty signing part. So that's obviously made the British and the Americans upset. So they want to try and bump that back up, which it's going to anyways, I believe, because whoever wins this agreement, whenever wins this issue, is going to bump it back up 1 anyways. So they, now it's not necessarily true, because the Americans might have some more dirty stuff up their sleeves, but we'll have to see. We'll cross that bridge. So the Italians kick it over to the British, and the British look at things, and they had nothing. They had no cubes, no military, no nothing, with plenty in the exhausted box. And they look at this and say, okay, the Americans are next, and the Americans' issues that they want are up there. They only have 4 cubes in the military. There's not a whole lot that's looking like all that positive for them as far as what they can do on their turn. So if I resolve this issue with me ahead, I'm just going to give them the opportunity to pick up an issue they want, because all 3 of those interest them. So they'll just, either resolve one of those issues or, pick up the European issue, Russia negotiations, drop some cubes on it, whatever it is. It's going to, make the decision a little bit easier for them. So what they decided to do instead was not, do any favors for the Americans, and just decided to pick up 6 cubes, 2 military, 1 of which they deployed to Europe, because they feel like a fight's coming there eventually over the Rhineland, and so they want to be prepared. So now the Americans are looking at it with that conundrum and saying there's nothing really good to do with this turn. So they're going to kind of force the issue here a little bit. They're going to resolve Macedonia because it's really, not that big of a deal. They keep giving the points to the Italians, which is a little concerning, but the Italians are going to resolve it as the Middle East, which is fun, because that's going to push up the unrest there. Oops, sorry about that. To being equal with Europe, which means if there's an uprising Czech, they'll both go through it. And then they will resolve this card, which is lots of fun. Vladimir Lenin says, beginning with you, each player either takes a demobilize action or reduces happiness by 2. So the Americans go first. They don't have a condition that says that they need to keep military. They're I think they're in the lead, honestly, for points. So they look at it and say, let's demobilize. We're going to get to happiness because of that. And they're only going to be operating with 1 military, but, I think they're thinking it's worth a shot. But that forces everyone else to go through this. So the French have none here. They have 1 on the board and 2 in here. I don't know if whenever you do one of these actions, if you can take them from here or if they physically have to be in your supply. So the French, I'm going to look that up because the French actually wouldn't mind demobilizing. So it can come from exhausted. So the French will also exhaust 1 because they don't have any ties to their victory conditions. The Italians, they have 2 that they have in their pile, as well as 2 on the board, but they get a point for every 1, and they are not about this. They're not about it. So they say that we can screw the British and the Americans with this 1 action, and they see the Americans as a pretty big competitor here, so they're going to take a 2 happiness hit. As a way of keeping those victory points. The British have already demobilized 1, and they get 2 for each, so they really don't want to do that. And plus, they're only going to get 1 for it because all the places are taken. So they're going to give up 2 as well, and that's risky. But they say if they do a mutiny, they're going to lose. The same thing's going to happen anyways because all the spaces are taken, so it's not worth to. Like whenever they did it the first time, they get 5 happiness. That's a big deal. So they did it then because it was actually worth it. But now it doesn't appear to be. So now the Americans say we can bring up our own issues here. They will happily bring up military intervention because they do not want to give the Italians a free pass on Slovenia, Croatia. So they'll bring this one up, which they could resolve this way and put down the British happiness by 1, which would make them demobilize, which would make them have a mutiny, excuse me. Now, between these 2, ending with you, each player either exhausts 3 influence or loses 2 happiness. That wouldn't be good for the Italians. Uprising Czech in the Balkans, that's kind of fun. The Americans don't have a lot to bid with that, so they're going to bring this one down. And they're going to draw 2. So we have German East Africa. Not a whole lot in the Americans fit with this one. And then they have Vietnam, which doesn't have a self-determination marker, so they're kind of iffy about this one as well. This one, 2 of the things make them go down, so getting a Pacific issue would be interesting, but then also if there's unrest there, they're the only person who has it. They already have an Africa issue, and that would give them 2, which means they'd have to give it up. So they're going to go with this one. Try and keep the points lower. Don't want to give anybody else a good run. So they're going to put German East Africa away and not have to deal with that. And then lastly, Uprising Czech. There it is. We're finally going to have one. And it comes just in time to do actually 2 Uprising Czechs. So we have 1 in Europe and 1 in the Middle East. So both of them need a 4 or higher, and both of them can have modifiers. The Americans are going to modify down because they don't want this to happen, and the Italians are going to modify up because they do want this to happen. And the British don't have a say. So it's going to be just whatever the roll is because the modifiers. Well, you know the rule. If it hits the floor, you re-roll it. Alright, so it's a 3. And modified one way or another, 3 is not going to do it. So it ends there. No European uprising, excuse me. Now the Middle East. This will fall onto the British, which they're not looking forward to. So they're going to modify 1 down. The Italians are going to modify 1 up. So we're going to have the same thing, just whatever the straight up roll is. And it is a 1. So low again and no uprising. So the Americans and the British hold on to those spaces, and the Americans think they have done sufficient damage here on their turn otherwise and set themselves up in a pretty good position. So now the French, oh, by the way, as part of this, this love affair the French and the British are having now, the British said, we're not going to resolve this because we don't want to bring an American issue down, but we're also happy to have the French take over the reparations issue, and they will even resolve it, assuming that they resolve it on the bottom side, which, the French would rather do this one because it will give them that industry. But since they're all goody-goody right now with each other, the British said you can have this issue, which is a 5, just like the 5 they gave to the British, the Mesopotamia issue, and we will even resolve it for you. So that's they really have cemented their position together with this agreement. So the French are definitely going to be hopping on that, and probably Vietnam. Okay, so the French went ahead and took the reparations issue as was they were instructed, and Vietnam. The Italians just grabbed some cubes back. They don't have anything to play for here right now. The British decided, they looked at the board and placed enough cubes on the military intervention issue to where the Americans cannot take it from them. Also putting 1 up on the Russian negotiations. That way they know that they are pretty much, there's no way they can't really win the military intervention issue. Now that leaves them vulnerable. And, they didn't realize it when they did it, but looking back, I don't think they would have done anything else. Maybe it was a bad idea, but we'll have to see. So the Americans say, you know what, we're going to get you for this. We are going to settle the military intervention issue. So since they're settling it as the non-winners, they get all 5 of their cubes back. All 7 of the British go to the exhausted pile. And the British will take this issue, and they were going to do it as this one, right? And resolve for the French and the Italians. So they did not lose a happiness of their own because they're sitting here on the verge. Well, the card that is going, the event that's going to happen says, ending with you, each player either exhausts 3 influence or loses 2 happiness. Well, the British don't have any influence to exhaust, so they're going to lose 2 happiness anyways. So, given that, they're going to go ahead and do this and resolve it as the top one to get that extra point. So, they will reduce the American happiness by 1, their own happiness by 1, which puts them down into that next category. And they're going to pick up a naval marker to drop down here. So then they'll be forced to have a mutiny because it says 2 military, and the British have 3. 1 on the board, 1 in their supply, 2 on the board. So they have to remove 1. I don't know if it has to come from the region track or if it can come from somewhere else. I'm going to look that up. So it just says you have to demobilize. It's not specific, so I'm guessing you just use the normal demobilize rules, which means that it can come from anywhere, obviously besides the demobilize section. So they're going to take this, drop it here, and I believe they get that happiness for that. But it's muted. But let me also check that. Yep, so that increases their happiness back up by 1. So they're back into the 3 military side, but that's not a big deal. So moving on from that, we get this card, which says exhaust 3 or lose 2 happiness. It ends with the Americans, so it'll start off with the French. The French get double their happiness, so they don't really want that. So they're going to drop in 3 exhaust 3. The Italians kind of the same way, not big about, if they lose this, they'll go down into the 2 military spot because of their happiness, so they're not about that. The British cannot, because they don't have any, so they will slide theirs down by 2, which puts them at 9. So you have to be careful not to get down to 0, because 0 is losing 5 happiness, as well as not having any military, so that's not good. And then the Americans are last, and they have a plethora of cubes, so they don't see why not. They'll drop in 3. Now for the rest, the Americans are in a tough spot because they don't want to bring down this, because that'll pretty much guarantee that it goes to the Italians. Now they could have an uprising in the Balkans if they can get that unrest up, and it would be the highest issue, but they're not going to do that just yet. So they're going to bring down something else instead, and it'll be this Vietnam issue, because that'll give the French 2, and they can't resolve 2, they can't settle 2 issues, so they'll bring this one down instead and make them choose. Then they get to pull one of these, uprising check in the Balkans, or uprising check in the Balkans. So they're going to do this one, though, because if it fails, you add an unrest. So well, actually, then it may be better to leave, if that's what the cards are, it may actually be better to put this down here, leave this here, and bring down this. That way, whenever an issue is resolved, it'll probably be this one first, though, with the Italians. Then they'll just they could bring down the other one. They don't have to bring down the other one. But let's do this one, because then it'll add one. I think this will work. I think adding this one is best. But they will bring this down, because then if the Italians take this, or if the French take this, there's still a possibility that an issue goes and then another one, and that'll be all before the Italians have the opportunity to put down some military in the Balkans. So that's what they're going to go with. Then they're going to go with an issue they picked last time. They don't want German East Africa, so we have Somalia, which this looks really nice, minus the Italians, but they have an idea about this. And then Sicily, maybe. And that one looks pretty good. So now looking at both of these, somebody's going to pull this back up. I almost guarantee it. This one hurts the French, who they actually do have a pretty big bonus. So they're going to pick this one instead and drop it in. And lastly, do we have another uprising? Let's see. Add 2 unrest to a random region. Millicent. Fawcett. Very nice. So we're going to add 2 unrest to a random region. And the random region is determined by a die roll. There's the numbers. 6, nothing happens. And it's a 3. So we can't add 2 to 3. So nothing will happen, and it'll pass over to the French. So the French will resolve widow pensions. This is going to have some kick-on effects, some knock-on effects, I should say. All 5 over into the exhausted. British get back half, which is 2. And they will, as was previously agreed upon, they are going to, or was previously proposed, they don't have to uphold this, is they were going to do it as this side, which lowers the American happiness. This gets you the point, but I think they're not going to do that. They are going to do it as the other one. Lower the American happiness by 1. Raise European unrest, which can't go any higher, and place a German reparations marker on this card here. So now this has some knock-on effects, because this card says uprising check in the Balkans, if no unrest, add 1 unrest, or no uprising, add an unrest. So the Balkans is currently unoccupied by any military. No one's given it any bother. but it's at a 5 or higher. So it'll be an unmodified 5 or higher, 5 or a 6. And it is a 3. So no uprising, but since it did not succeed, it will go up 1. In which case now, if there's an uprising check at all, 3 regions will have an uprising, which is very interesting, with some interesting effects. So now we're going to pick one of these. The French say Vietnam to keep themselves kind of locked in up front on resolving some of these issues. Pick one of these, ending with you. Each player either spends 4 influence or loses 2 happiness. Now that's interesting because that obviously you get to place those. So that's kind of an interesting card. But I think they want to keep doing this so that if the Italians do take this issue, it'll just come right back up. I don't know if that really benefits them, but they definitely don't want this one because they don't have any influence, so they don't want to lose happiness. So either way, they're going to bring this one down. Now, digging through here to get an issue, this one looks interesting. It would cost them 1 influence to bring it out. They like it. Do they like it enough to dig down there for it when they may or may not win it? Yeah, they do. Because they're going to try and leave that issue a little bit higher up. And it may distract from some other ones that they could win if everyone's focusing on this and the Russian negotiations. Lastly, uprising check. What do we get? Controller of issue being settled loses 2 happiness. So that was the French. They resolved the widows' pensions. So they will just lose 2 happiness, which isn't a big deal. I mean, they would like it to be higher, but they'll be all right. So now the Italians, they've got 6 here, and they want to resolve that, but obviously they're going to have this here. So what they're going to do first is deploy. They got to be careful with this because they could really mess themselves up. So they're going to deploy this to the Balkans. And they're going to place it here, which will give them the ability to modify. They're going to get 2 influence cubes from here. They're going to drop their happiness by 1, which puts them on the brink there. And they do not want to go down because they'll actually end up losing 2. So that's not good. Now, that allows them to modify, which is why they're going to do that. So whenever they resolve this issue, half of this goes back to the Americans. It's going to be 3, 2 in the box. All 6 of these go away to the Italians. They're going to get this and do this one. Even though this is not good, obviously, it gives the Americans 2, they're still going to do it to get the 5, and they don't want to lose their military stuff, their military. So if you look, the Italians have a whole list down here. They're going to bump up their happiness by 1 and get 2 self-determination markers, which help actually the French as well. So they're not disappointed with this course of action. So we'll have to pick up this card now, which says uprising check in the Balkans. If no uprising, subtract 1 unrest. So now here's the big moment for the Italians. This could go very good or very bad. So it's going to be a 4 or higher, and the Italians are going to modify by a -1. I'm going to subtract 1 from the die roll. They obviously don't want this to happen because then they're going to have Slovenia, Croatia come right back up. But if it does happen, they have that military that they can bid, and nobody else has any military to bid. So all they would have to do is basically just drop a military. And so it's not the end of the world, it's just that they'll have to bid for something. And it is a 1. Modified down by 1 means it's not going to be an uprising. So they escape with that one. No one was really in the position to fight them on it anyways, though. So it would have not really been a big deal. So, looking here, none of these are great. This one is interesting, but the British come up after them, so they don't want to hand it to them. This one seems like it's going to cause some problems for everybody, which is always fun and sometimes is useful for you. So they're going to drop Germany, East Africa down there. They're going to pick between one of these two, either add or remove to unrest from the Middle East, or the influence stuff. And the influence one's interesting because it drops the British and the French happiness. Or it would, because they wouldn't have enough. Yeah, they'll put this one down there. And make everybody else feel a little bit of pain. Then Somalia looks really nice. So they'll drop that one in there. Lastly, this would be big if this was an uprising, because there would be 3 regions. Each player ending with you may move 1 deployed or exhausted military to available. Each player ending with you. So the British could move 1 back if they wanted. They don't. The Americans could move 1 back if they wanted. They don't. The French can move 1 from exhausted, which they will do. And the Italians can move 1 back if they want. And the Balkans is kind of interesting, but not enough. So that's going to be it. And that'll do it. So now the British, with a lot in the box, it'll probably be a cleanup round for most. The British picked back up cubes. The Americans split 4 between, put 4 on East Africa and Somalia. The French resolved or settled Vietnam, which moved as a French mandate, which moved down the American happiness by 1, the Pacific unrest up by 1, and got them a marker and another card, an empire marker. So the only reason I brought this up was because everybody has to choose whether or not, ending with the French player, they want to spend 4 influence or lose 4 happiness. So the Italians do not want to lose 2 happiness because that would make them demobilize 2 of their armies. So they're going to instead spend 4, and it just says spend 4. It doesn't say, the same way as normally, in which case you have to take 2 issues. I'm guessing you just place 4. So with that, they're going to just place 4 on Somalia, which is kind of interesting. The British don't care if they lose more happiness because they're in the safe zone. They don't, they're okay to give up some room. Now, would they just want to put 4 out? No, that's not bad. Because they could put 4, they can divide it up however they want. They could put some on this one, in which case, then the French have to decide what they want to bring down. In which case they'd probably just bring down that one. So, or they could drop, 4 down here on Germany, East Africa, which ties that one up, which I think is probably the best move. Just so they don't have to spend their turn doing that. The Americans don't have the influence to do it. They also don't care because they've demobilized 3, so that's going to drop them down to 11. And then the French go last, and they don't have the cubes, but they don't care either because they're below the mark that would happen if they went here anyways. They already demobilized 2, so they're fine. And now the French, between Somalia, Cilicia maybe, and the Russian negotiations are going to bring down this one. Somalia is kind of interesting, but they're going to bring down this one in hopes of hopping in on it when nobody is paying attention. This one is add or remove 2 from the Middle East unrest, or this is an optional take a deploy action and then gain 1 happiness. So that's pretty interesting. Because deploying obviously normally has the opposite effect. So I think they are going to take this, put it down there, and they are going to put their cube on it, because that's quite good. Now, to decide between these, they're going to draw. So we have Korea, which is big time because if it goes independent, the Japanese really get pissed, and they have not had an opportunity to slide this down. Remember, they do not want the Italians or the Japanese to sign the treaty, so that is their opportunity. This is going to be heavily fought over. And then we have Silesia, which the French would want this side because of the industry, but would not want that because of that. So I think they're going to go with Korea. Try and knock down that Japanese happiness and get them to not sign the treaty. Lastly, looking for an uprising, which would make it interesting. And we have add one unrest to the region of issue being settled. So that was Vietnam, which is the Pacific, which will now push it all the way up until it's level with the others. So now every region minus Africa is in the 4 space, or the 5th space, I should say, the +4 space. In which case, if there's an uprising check, it's going to go down everywhere in absolute chaos because not everyone's going to have stuff to bid on. So this makes it kind of lead all up to a point, in which case it's going to be very interesting when everything comes crumbling down. So that's the French turn, and I think that may wrap it up for this video, just as far as the length goes. But it'll be the Italians' turn with not a whole lot to do. So I think they may end it for this one. Thanks for watching.